Well, here is a philosopher who is frequently misquoted and even more frequently misunderstood and demonized by those who do not understand him. Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, a little bit of background on Nietzsche. Nietzsche was a great success as a student, particularly in his study of Greek and philology. He became a professor at the University of Basel in his 20s, which was unheard of. And he bailed on that really chestnut of a job. He bailed because he couldn't stomach his colleagues. He thought they were hypocrites in stuffed shirts. So you're someone who really was trying to live by his beliefs. He was willing to make sacrifices for his beliefs. In his 40s, he had a mental breakdown. I mean, he was having apparently some difficulties with his mental stability to begin with, but when he was in his 40s, he saw someone beating a horse, just beating a horse with incredible violence. He burst into tears, ran over and threw his arms around the neck of the horse, shouting, "I understand you." Think of that. Here is a horse who is basically, he's trapped in his fate. He's subjected to all kinds of abuse. He's utterly unappreciated. He's just regarded as an object, objectified, as de Beauvoir would call it, objectified. And Nietzsche says, "I understand you," and is totally, totally devastated by the suffering of the horse. He did offer to buy the horse from the man who was beating it, and was turned down. Well, this, I think, is emblematic of Nietzsche's heroic struggle. His whole life, he understood as a heroic struggle, and this is what he recommended for us, to struggle heroically against the limitations of our lives. The heroic struggle is the process of creating the Übermensch, beyond what human beings are now, to something that is beyond good and evil, that is, in fact, the embodiment of freedom. Because freedom, as de Beauvoir says, is the goal of ethics. Since the Übermensch is the embodiment of freedom, the Übermensch is beyond good and evil, beyond those conventions, beyond those dichotomies. Okay, now how easy is it to misunderstand that? Very easy, of course. This isn't simply anything goes, do what you will. This is, in fact, in the realization of freedom, we realize what ethics was supposed to be all about to begin with. So, we previously, when we talked about Simone de Beauvoir, I'm beginning to see why I started with de Beauvoir. We talked about rising above the facticity of the human condition, understanding the tension between what is given, it's the in itself that is not part of our choosing, and our choosing, our willing ourselves to freedom. Nietzsche was very much about willing ourselves to freedom. You are not a victim of your circumstances. Whatever happens to you, whatever you are born into, you have choices about what you will become, about who you will be, and ultimately, authenticity is a matter of becoming who you really are, and not blaming others. Interesting note, Søren Kierkegaard was a personal friend, drinking buddy apparently, from what I can glean, of Hans Christian Andersen, who wrote all those beloved children's stories, right? The Little Mermaid and so forth. Anderson wrote a novel about a man who was good at heart and a little innocent and naive, which essentially was not far removed from Hans Christian Andersen himself, but who, excuse me, was overwhelmed by the circumstances of his life, by who was defeated by the world. And it was sort of a compassionate tale about, don't blame people who face overwhelming odds if they are not so supernaturally strong as to resist all those odds. Well, Kierkegaard was outraged and wrote a scathing review, which ruined their friendship. Okay? But it was basically it was because of an understanding of life that Kierkegaard shared with Nietzsche. It is bad faith to say your circumstances have overwhelmed you. You choose what you're going to do about it. And there may be choices that are not open to you because of material circumstances. But how in your heart and mind you understand your circumstances and the stance you take in life because of that is within your control. Again, this is one area where some people would criticize existentialists such as Kierkegaard and Nietzsche by saying, this is the voice of privilege, saying you can be whatever you want to be. Just, and if you don't, then you're somehow, it's because of your own weakness. There's a Tom Hanks film in which he's the captain of a ship that is a commercial ship that is hijacked by Somali pirates. And the leader of the Somali pirates is saying to him, you blame us for becoming pirates? Your international corporations came here with their industrial ships and they overfished all the waters. We have for generations been fishermen and have worked hard and have provided for ourselves and our families and communities. But you, the West, you came here with technology that overwhelmed us, and now we can't fish well enough. We can't get enough fish in order to support ourselves. So that's why we're turning to things such as piracy and drug smuggling. And Tom Hanks, typical attitude of a Westerner, really, says, well, there must be something between fisherman and pirate. And the leader of the Somali pirates says to him, sure, in America. Okay, interesting discussion could be had about existentialism and how situations do limit what options are available to us. Okay? Well, rising above our facticity, taking that tension, realizing the tension between the given and choosing, willing oneself free. I mean, that's all stuff we've talked about before, and Nietzsche is all about that. And much of what he writes is about the heroic struggle to do exactly that. Say, do what you will, I am going to be who I really am. I am going to embrace and exercise my freedom. I'm going to become the Übermensch. He who lives beyond good and evil in the full actualization of his freedom. Sounds good. Well, Nietzsche has some very specific suggestions regarding how we cultivate the Übermensch in ourselves. and avoid the slave mentality that is the alternative to being an Ubermensch. Okay, first of all, he says embrace envy. Well, doesn't that turn Christian ethics on its head? Of course, embrace envy. Envy is a compass pointing to what we know we lack, but can choose to become. Okay? When we envy, our hearts are telling us this is who we should be, and we're not doing it, so we need to correct that. Okay? Or die trying. The American poet Bukowski is often quoted as saying, "Find something you love and let it kill you." Now, apparently that he didn't actually say that, as far as I can determine, but he said things that were very close to that, so it's a paraphrase rather than a direct quotation. Okay, yeah, well, envy is saying this is what you should be giving your life for. You should live for this. You should become this. And you know that. You know that in your heart. Don't sit there wishing you were the object of envy. Become this. Actualize your freedom. First step. Okay? None of this do not covet stuff, okay? Ask yourself why you covet, because that is going to be an important hint about what you need to do in order to actualize your freedom. Second step, reject Christianity. Christianity is slave morality. Okay? Nietzsche says the only person in the New Testament worth envying is Pontius Pilate. I think historically that's a bit suspicious. I mean, Pontius Pilate was withdrawn from his role as a governor, withdrawn by Rome because he was too brutal. Okay, you got to go some to have Rome decide that you are too brutal to be a Roman governor in the Middle East at this period of history. But you get the point. The point is that Pontius Pilate was a person who, according to Nietzsche, utilized the situation in order to establish his own authority, actualize himself, actualize his values, and he's got all these nebuchadnezzars, milling about, preaching slave morality. Be meek, be humble, be timid, be self-effacing. If a man oppresses you to carry his burden, carry it an extra mile cheerfully. Christianity, says Nietzsche, has made a virtue of cowardice and weakness. We should, instead of becoming slaves, battling against what is natural for us, which is self-preservation, the improvement of our lives, Christianity says we should cultivate this slave morality. No way, says Nietzsche. Heroically struggle for who you really are. Okay. So, for example, Christianity urges purity. We even have people wearing purity rings these days, I guess, right? That show that it's like wearing a t-shirt that says, "I don't have sex." Okay, well, whether or not you choose to have sex is your business. But the idea of casting sex as being evil, this is one of our most basic primal urges. Our sexuality is a part of our joy of life. It says don't treat sex as if it's dirty, and don't tell yourself that you are more pure for repressing your instincts. Okay, goodness. In addition to purity, we were told to cultivate goodness, and goodness always turns out, says Nietzsche, to be a form of weakness. Man who strikes you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. Well, if you're a warrior, which Nietzsche urges, people are going to be more reluctant to strike you on the cheek, and if they do, you're going to kill them. Or at the very least, make them regret having striking you on the cheek. Now that's what they are already doing, exerting their power in this way. I know I can strike you on the cheek, and I'm going to do it. Okay? They are obeying their basic instincts. They are comfortable with who they are. Obedience, right? Purity, goodness, obedience. Okay, obedience always turns out just to be submission. Submission to whom? Submission to people who conceive of themselves as masters rather than slaves. And oftentimes, they lack personal excellence. They're not so much admirable as they are just simply in a position of being the slapper rather than he who gets slapped, because because other people aren't stepping up to the role. And finally, forgiveness. Forgiveness, says Nietzsche, is simply embracing our own helplessness, saying I can't do anything about it. Okay, forgive and forget, because what else am I going to do? Now, of course, many people would argue the opposite and say that, they're restraining the instincts, restraining your anger, putting your love of God and love of humanity ahead of your instincts, that is actually requires more strength and a better appreciation of your own true nature and so forth. And Nietzsche is vehemently rejecting that. Okay? I'm not, in listing these things, I'm not saying, explaining these things, I'm not saying, these people are right and Nietzsche's wrong, or Nietzsche's wrong and these people are right, or whatever. Okay? I'm simply putting that out there for you to think about. Okay, number 3, no alcohol. Why? Is this some sort of puritanical streak in Nietzsche? No, not at all. He says, alcohol is like Christianity. It dulls you so that, and debilitates you, so that you really don't resist being a slave. It makes your slavery more comfortable for you. Comfortable doesn't mean happy. And a fulfilling life comes from living dangerously. Alcohol and Christianity get in the way of all that. Just go to church and get drunk. Go to church on Sunday morning and get drunk Saturday night. And you can continue to pretend that your life is not a pitiful sham. That is bad faith. Okay? Fleeing from authenticity, denying your freedom, refusing to acknowledge and choose our own real preferences. Okay? So I oftentimes find students use the phrase, live life to the fullest. Well, I just want to live my life to the fullest. And when I ask them, what does that phrase mean? What does it mean to live your life to the fullest? Usually they have no idea what they mean by it. Or just, cannot explain it. And I'm not playing the Socratic gadfly when I ask that. Seriously, what does it mean? If that's your compass for how to live your life, live life to the fullest, what does that even mean? Does live life to the fullest mean live dangerously, live boldly, take all kinds of risks, and pay the price? Or does it mean duck and cover, don't take unnecessary risk, and that way you're more likely to be able to enjoy your life unmolested. There was I take, I agree with Carl Jung that the psychoanalyst Carl Jung that popular culture is sort of a vulgarization of important psychological or mythological truths about ourselves. So I'm not at all hesitant to take examples from popular culture. And having said that, there is an old episode of The Simpsons, which is, yes, I am pointing to The Simpsons, an example of a philosophical point. Why not? Homer Simpson thinks he's going to die because he ate some poison fish at a Japanese restaurant. He thinks he's got 24 hours to live. He's trying to figure out how he can live life to the fullest in that last 24 hours. 24 hours later, he has fallen asleep in his chair. He wakes up and says, I didn't die. I'm alive. From now on, I'm going to cherish every moment and live every life to its fullest. And then over the closing credits, he's sitting there in the chair watching TV, eating, junk food, watching TV. Now, I've asked students about that before, about how they would interpret that. And some say, well, what it means is that he does not really have any resolve about making his life better. He just goes right back to his old habits, sleepwalking through his life. And others say, no, wait a minute. He's not a genius. He's not refined aesthetically. Sitting in front of the TV eating junk food may be his conception of what it is to live life to the fullest. Now, why do I use that example? I just want to show how useless that phrase is. Okay? Without an explanation. Living a happy and fulfilling life for Nietzsche means living dangerously. Because there is no way to understand the possibilities of your freedom except by taking chances, exposing yourself to danger. Finally, all right, God is dead. Okay, that gets very often quoted by people who have no idea what Nietzsche meant by it. Okay, whether it's conservative Christians saying, Nietzsche is dead, but my God is still alive. Okay, well, I think you kind of missed the point there. The phrase occurs in Nietzsche's work, Thus Spake Zarathustra. Zarathustra is the name of the founder of the Zoroastrian religion, and the literary Zarathustra, who is a character in Nietzsche's work, Nietzsche's poetic work, bears essentially no real resemblance to the historical Zarathustra. This is not about Zoroastrianism. This is about Nietzsche's beliefs. Okay. The whole phrase, the whole situation when she says God is dead, what he's saying that to a group of clergymen who are on a pilgrimage. Zarathustra asked them, "Who are you? What are you doing?" He said, "We come to, we're men of God. We're coming to take this pilgrimage to honor God, and so forth and so forth." And they walk off, and Zarathustra, in disbelief, says, "Can it be they don't know? Can it be they have not heard? They do not realize that God is dead, and it is they who have killed him?" Okay. We have killed, Western culture, we have killed God. We do not really believe in God, not the way that the ancients did. We have displaced God with other values, with other concepts, with other ways of understanding the world. Someone develops pneumonia. We don't say, God must be really ticked off at you. We might still say, you should pray. But we'll also send you to the hospital to get antibiotics and whatever other treatment is prescribed. Because we place that catastrophic diseases, and yes, pneumonia is catastrophic if untreated, we place that within the realm of natural occurrences that don't need to appeal to the supernatural for their explanations. God is dead. We don't really believe in that stuff anymore. We may pretend we do. We may claim we do. We may even believe that we do. But that's simply bad faith. We're pretending to believe what we don't believe. Okay? That leaves a gap, though. The God is dead leaves a gap in our lives. Not embracing and embodying values, because that came formerly from our belief in God was, as a culture, I mean, not personally, but as a culture, that came from our religious beliefs. Ultimately, the meaning of life has to do with God and all these other religious doctrines. Well, what's left there? Is life without any meaning because God is gone? Well, Nietzsche says, no, of course not. We want meaning in our lives. We should look to such things as art. Okay? Art and culture, poetry, music, literature. All the things that involve our reaching our full potential, utilizing our freedom, understanding our freedom as freedom, and finding our potential. And again, we can do that without reference to the supernatural. Well, okay, Nietzsche, like Kierkegaard, talks about stages of life. They are not the same as Kierkegaard's stages of life. But tying it together, let's let's just hit the high points here. 4 stages of life, as I'm understanding what he says. First of all, the dragon. We're confronted with the dragon. The dragon is mysterious, powerful, terrifying, ancient. This golden dragon has on each one of its scales written all the values, all the things of value, all the things that give value. Okay, so the dragon, basically, the stage of life where we admire and fear the dragon and are in awe of the dragon, we're trying to memorize what's on all those scales. And the dragon itself, however, is the creator and destroyer of the world. Okay? The dragon creates, sustains, and destroys the world. That's not an idea that is especially new. Well, okay. First stage then is we encounter the dragon. Second stage, we become the camel. The camel bears the burden of others. The camel is reliable. The camel is strong and sturdy. Eventually, being the camel, you are taking the burden of others, and you are realizing that does give a kind of meaning to your life. But eventually, you may realize that your own will, your own freedom, has been compromised by this role. Do I exist solely for others? Well, then what do they exist for? Do they exist solely for others? This is a house of cards. When the camel realizes that it's not sustainable to continue to be a camel forever, the camel becomes the lion. The lion can confront the dragon. Instead of simply dragging around all these scales and with your mission of sharing them with everyone, the lion can turn around and say, every thou shalt the dragon has given me, I'm going to say, no, I won't. Every thou shalt not, I'm going to say, I will if I want to. Okay? I don't know if you've ever seen a film called The Devil's Advocate. Toward the end, Satan, who is incarnated himself as the head of a legal firm, said, well, if you're going to take over the world and turn it to evil, what better place could you be? As he says, lawyers are everywhere. If we have the lawyers, we've got everything. So he gives a speech saying, I am the original humanist. Your God is a sadist. He creates this beautiful world and he says, don't touch it. Well, all right, you can touch it, but don't taste it. Okay, taste it, but don't swallow it. I've always been on the side of humanity saying, just do it. Just enjoy it. Okay? Again, you understand that when I explain a point of view, I'm trying to explain it in a way as, if you will, sympathetic. Because to understand a point of view, you have to understand why someone might actually hold that point of view. But I'm not endorsing. Satan is better than Yahweh, okay, or anything of the kind. But I'm saying it is worth realizing that these are two conceptions of how we encounter the divine and what we should do about it. And to simply prejudge one is better than the other is okay, bad faith. So we know we haven't really considered it. We simply jump to an allegiance. The lion is confronting the dragon, but is still defined by its relation to the dragon. Okay, the rebel is defined by what it rebels against. And the dragon, of course, is all this received wisdom and all the conventions of the world. All these things are written on its scales. And see the whole cultural heritage. I'm having, as the lion, the courage to look at this whole heritage and say, I don't think so. No, I'm not going to go that way. Joy of discovery now instead. And finally, the last stage is we become the child. The child has forgotten the past. It is able to make something better. It is able to create. It is able to see all these things that are presented to it, but without necessarily endorsing, embracing, or defining itself in terms of those things. Become the storm, says Nietzsche, out of which the Übermensch may fall with the rain. So, one more thing I should mention before we leave this lecture is Nietzsche and the Nazis. Okay, Nietzsche was not a Nazi. He was not a crypto-Nazi. The Nazis greatly admired certain of his writings, which they took out of context and interpreted as they pleased. People, notoriously people do that with Nietzsche. If I find something that I see as an excuse for being nasty, I'll quote that out of context, not place it in the context of this bigger spiritual adventure, if you will, this heroic struggle. What I will do is simply simply take the bits and pieces and use them to justify whatever I please. That is bad faith. Okay, the Nazis did that notoriously. Ayn Rand quotes Nietzsche out of context repeatedly, and I've never yet met or read a Nietzsche scholar who thought that she had any of that right. So, 9 to the Nazis. Okay, the Nazis, and of course they've left things out such as, Simone de Beauvoir talks about the oppressor. Oppression is bad faith. It certainly has precedence in the talking in the views of Nietzsche. Okay, being the oppressor is not what makes you free. It's getting rid of the slave mentality in yourself that makes you free. So now Nietzsche, after he had his mental breakdown and was convalescing, was in an asylum for a while, and his sister was managing his estate. The scholarly consensus now is that she edited, that is, really messed with some of his writings, added stuff that it was not in the original, and rewrote some things in a way that was less, in a way that, sort of betrayed the intentions of Nietzsche. How do we know that? Well, analysis of literary style. Sometimes, earlier versions of documents can be found earlier than those which ended up being published with his sister's approval. So, a contemporary Nietzsche scholar would need to peel away the layers of faux Nietzsche in order to get to what Nietzsche actually said. Nietzsche wrote, "I have but one policy concerning anti-Semites. I will have nothing to do with them." Okay, in admiring Nietzsche, or rather his recreation of Nietzsche, Adolf Hitler certainly neglected, "I will have nothing to do with anti-Semites." Okay, so I want you to think about the stages of life that Nietzsche talks about poetically, what they may have to do with your own life, and your understanding your own destiny. What does this idea of the Übermensch have to do with you and the actualization in your life of your own freedom? Becoming heroically who you are.